All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to a discussion of Jade City by Fonda Lee. This is, of course, book one of the Green Bone Saga. Jimmy.
Wrong book.
That was the earlier discussion.
I'm all mixed up.
I know. Jade City, Jade City. You got to have Robert there behind you, help you out, or Bobby B. Yeah, help you out there, keep
Oh
things
man.
straight. That's why he's there. So, but it is so lovely to have my three guests here today to talk about this book. Now, this is going to be a discussion about Jade City only. We are going to start with no spoilers, just general assessments. So this could serve as a review of a sort from all three of these wonderful people. And then we're going to get into the spoilers, and I'll give a warning when that's about to happen. But we'll do a non-spoiler assessment, talk about themes, and then we'll talk about our kind of cool moments, of which there are many in this book. So let me introduce my wonderful guest here. There is right next to me, Jimmy from the Fantasy Network. Hello, Jimmy. Long time no see.
Yes, very, very nice to be here. This is a book I was very excited to talk about. I was going to do a spoiler section apart when I did my no spoiler review, but that no spoiler review was already really long. So I was like, I'll just wait for the discussion with those three other lovely people. And now we're here. So let's get it going. Let's cook.
Let's do it. Let's do it. And below Jimmy is Taylor from Made Between the Pages. And how are you today, Taylor?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. This is just one of my favorite series of all time. So you really don't have to twist my arm to talk about it. So I'm so excited.
Awesome. Awesome. And in fact, you, I think, are the person who is responsible for me reading this because it came up during our Dear Dr. Fantasy episode. And we talked about it, and I said, well, I'm thinking about reading it, and would you like to discuss it with me? And here we are now. So this is how
I'm honored.
Yeah, well, no, so am I, and I'm excited, and I'm glad that you got me to do this. And I also, when I talked to Bookborn
Hello.
for Dear Dr. Fantasy, also this came up, and I said, hey, I'm actually going to be reading this and talking about it with Taylor. So, Bookborn, would you like to join in? And she was gracious enough to agree. So, thank you so much for being here, Bookborn.
Thanks for having me. I'm like Taylor. This is one of my favorite series now, top 10 fantasy series. So like not a twist of my arm to force me to talk about it.
Yeah, you two are really big on this trilogy. Like a lot of my other friends on this platform, like a lot of our other friends, like Patrick, of course, has been praising this trilogy a lot. So a lot of people love this trilogy. So I'd like to get your non-spoiler, I guess, assessment of, since the two of you, Bookborn and Taylor, have actually read the entire trilogy. You can talk about the entire trilogy. We're not doing spoilers anyway. But also where you feel this fits in the context of the trilogy. And then I'm going to get Jimmy's non-spoiler assessment of just Jade City, and then we'll talk about themes. So, Bookborn, would you like to go first?
Sure, I'll start us off.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I love the trilogy so much, particularly the themes of family and blood and clan. I just think that Fonda Lee explores them in a very interesting way, particularly to me, how the protagonists we follow in No Peak Clan aren't necessarily like they don't have the moral high ground to their antagonists. And that is a theme that continues for the whole series, a theme that I always find very fascinating. When we're like, if we were hearing this story from the Mountain Clan's perspective, how would our opinion of our characters change? And I just think that's a very interesting thing that I don't see done a ton. It is definitely done in fantasy, but I think it's done particularly well here. I'm also a sucker for like found family, like where do you fall with blood and clan? I really liked that kind of drama because it feels more rooted in reality. It doesn't feel manufactured. I have a real hard time with manufactured drama, and nothing feels manufactured in Greenbone. It feels rooted in real relationships. And I don't know, I really love it. It's also just unique. Like, I just personally have not read anything quite like it. Now, I don't watch a lot of mafia movies. That's probably not going to surprise anyone. I also don't do like a lot of oh, what's the word? what city fantasy? Why am I blanking?
Urban
Like,
fantasy.
Urban,
Yeah.
thank
Urban
you.
fantasy. Yeah.
I don't do a ton of urban fantasy, but this one I think just blended the right amount of like typical fantasy genre things with Green Bones with the urban side, like just in the way that I don't know, it really worked for me. As far as where Jade City falls, I feel like I'm unpopular in that I tend to really like first books in series. Like I notice that I tend to always go back to a first book in a series where most people don't. So I actually quite still love Jade City. I would say Jade Legacy is my favorite, the third one.
Okay.
I think it is the best of the series. It's pretty mind-blowing how I feel personally. But I think Jade City is a very, very, very close second. Jade War is probably in third place, but again, not in a discernible difference for me. Like they were all very good.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, I feel like it's almost a universal consensus that Jade Legacy is just the mind-blowing finish to this trilogy. I mean, that's what I hear. So, Taylor, do you agree? Is that do you think it's Jade Legacy? No doubt that's where it just really takes off.
Well, I actually love hearing Bookborn say that she loves first book in series because I'm with you.
Oh, yes.
Right.
Thank you.
Maybe it's because I don't like endings. So I'm like, oh, I get to start again, right? I don't have to say goodbye. So maybe that's where that comes from. So I also have a very soft spot for Jade City specifically. But if you're going to talk about just the craft and the payoff, I would say Jade Legacy, yes, I would agree. It's just a phenomenal conclusion. And just to kind of go off of that, where Jade City kind of rests within the series for me is, I don't think it's a spoiler to say, based on the title, Jade Legacy, right? We have time jumps here. It's talked about pretty openly that there are large time jumps in this series. And I think that the reason that they're pulled off and done so well is because of the core work done in Jade City. Because we know these characters so intimately. We know why they do what they do, even if we don't like what they do. We're like, I hate that you did that, but I get why you did that. And I think that's really key for us to be able to fill in gaps that happen later. And when we see where characters are later in the series, we know them well enough to be like, oh, I could see how they got there. So I think Jade City, while in retrospect might look like smaller scale compared to the finales in Jade War and Jade Legacy, I think it's extremely key for the series, and shouldn't be looked down upon just because it's the smaller scale. But when I talk about Jade City in general, I have a lot of the same themes that I enjoyed that Bookborn said. So family is the core of it. Fonda has said herself that she wanted it to be a family saga. So her character work is almost unparalleled. I mean, there are a couple other authors that come to mind, but she's up with the greats for me for character work. So I really like that. And then an aspect also of this series that has always been close to my heart is because of the representation of Asian culture that's done so incredibly well. Now, I don't know if you can tell surprise. I am not Asian myself, but I know, right? People confuse it all the time. But my husband is Japanese and I've lived in Japan for a very long time. And Fonda Lee has said specifically that Kekkon does not represent one specific Asian culture. It's a blending of a bunch of them. But I can see the little nuances she put in there for people who are aware of that culture. And every time I read it, or upon this reread as well, those little moments are done so incredibly well that makes the world feel so rich that I feel so immersed. So for me personally, that's another aspect that I love.
Excellent. Yeah, the world building. That is something I remarked on. I didn't put out a dedicated review, but I did talk about the wonderful portrayal of what they call in perhaps sociology or something, a high context culture. And we come from, in the United States, a low context culture. And the difference being that in a low context culture, we tend to be much more we say exactly what we think we mean. You know, the words, more of the meaning is in the words. It's more literal. Whereas in a high context culture, people are much more attuned to body language. They're much more attuned to the intonation. And so you might say something in a way where you really mean the opposite of what you're saying. And people have to be more attuned to that. And I just love the richness with which Fonda Lee portrayed that, because most Asian cultures tend to be much more high context than American and some European cultures. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it, and how just naturally she wove that in there. It was really cool. There were moments, exchanges between characters where the characters were reading messages that weren't necessarily spoken, or in a literal way. So it was really cool in that way. I enjoyed the world building and the culture in there as well. So Jimmy,
it's my turn. Okay.
You put out a really wonderful review on your channel of Jade City, and I enjoyed that. And I thought you had some tremendous insights in there. So I do recommend everyone to check out Jimmy's review. But you want to summarize your non-spoiler thoughts for us on Jade City?
Yeah, it's fresh. It doesn't feel like really anything else I've read in the genre, which is a welcomed relief after you read, you know, hundreds upon hundreds of fantasy books. There are times where everything start feeling a little bit of the same, and like, did that happen in this book or that book? And recently I've had that a lot lately. Similar tropes, similar conflicts, resolutions even. So going into Jade City, what I wanted from it was something to be fresh. And obviously, I think it's held in pretty high regard as far as new releases go, and winning the World Fantasy Award and being up for many other awards as well. You know, there's a lot of hype behind this trilogy. And for me, the opening of it did deliver on that for sure. I would say that I also favor beginnings, which is weird because I feel like that I thought I was special, but apparently I'm not, because there's at least 2 other people here that agree with me. So I guess I am.
You're in good company.
Yes, I'm no longer a hipster for that, which is unfortunate. But I'll find something else to be pretentious about, and there's no problem there. But yeah, I love the story. I thought it was great. I definitely understand where people come with the mafia. You know, everyone says it's like a mafia movie, which I kind of understand, though I have more to say about that in our discussion for sure. Something that it's missing that is very integral to a mafia movie, and I can see why so many people might refute it. But yeah, it's everything that everyone else has said so far here in this chat. And the thing that I enjoyed most about it was the motivations, the character motivations. I thought were very consistent. I thought they made sense. And I ended up just caring about every single facet of the story. I don't think my favorite characters are necessarily the most popular favorite characters. You know, Boro is awesome, which is heresy to
you know
many
people. You have read one book, Mr.
We're fighting.
Jimmy. So let's reconvene.
I'm just going by what I know. I'm just going by what I know.
Tell us that later if you stick by that.
Boro. Well, we can talk about it, but again, this is a character that I just found fascinating. And we're not just talking about families and clans, but we're also talking about class and privilege of power and how that power is used and exerted. I thought that all of the shine stuff and the manufacturing of a drug was fabulous. I really enjoyed that. In fact, I kind of hope it gets brought up more, and I hope that that's something that she explores a little bit more. So yeah, duty was all over this book, and you know what that means to be a part of a family with those responsibilities, and how much of that do you have to take upon yourself, and everything else. So yeah, great cast of characters, really cool world, and I actually really enjoyed the magic in this book as well. It's not a hard magic system, but you know, it's a good magic system. How about that?
All right. Excellent. Yeah, those are wonderful thoughts. And I agree with you about social class. That's an important thing in here, I think. And that's a character perspective that delivers that theme, perhaps, more than most others. So I can see where you're coming from on that one. So awesome. Anyone want to add any non-spoiler themes to the mix before we start getting into spoilers? Did we miss any important themes
I wanted to add on to what Taylor said. I didn't know if we could talk about the time jumps, but since she did, I'm going to talk about them too.
I don't consider that a spoiler.
No.
Yeah, the time jumps, I think, just to reiterate what Taylor said, I don't think I've read time jumps that are done as well as this series. Fonda Lee knows her characters, and I was blown away by how characters could be in a situation where I truly didn't know what decision they were going to make, because both decisions would be acceptable for the character that Lee had written, which I think is very rare. A lot of times that stuff feels contrived, but these characters were making bad decisions that felt very on brand for them to be making. And I think that is just like such an achievement, because I just don't see it a lot. And so I'm glad Taylor brought that up. I just wanted to reiterate that I think that was one of the best things of this trilogy.
Cool. All right. Anyone else for the good of the order before we get into spoilers?
You can find
I would oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Jimmy,
No, go ahead.
Okay. I was going to say that for me, I also love the theme that she introduces in this first book of globalization and xenophobia, and how those two things interplay with each other, and how it affects the common man and those in power. Both of those, and how the history of your individual person will affect the way that you see those things. So even within the characters we get to know in this story, there are different levels of nationalism, xenophobia, and where's the line of that, and how open should your borders be for globalization in a political, arena, things like that. I really enjoyed her discussion of it because it was multifaceted.
Yeah, and also how does a culture deal with the influence from the outside coming to change the culture? How do you close yourself off? Do you embrace it? It's a complex thing, and it's something that you see in here as well. Brilliant observation. Yeah. Jimmy, you had one other thing?
Oh, you can find The Way of a Dan by Philip Chase on Amazon.com. That was it. That's all I had.
You can find anything on Amazon.com, actually.
But especially The Way of a Dan.
That is true. That is true. I think it's on sale.
It is in the top sales, right?
Yeah, it's on sale even. So yeah.
PhilipChaseAuthor.com.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So, all right. Well, in that case, I think we are ready for spoilers. And I thought, Jimmy, you brought up something really cool, the magic. And
yeah,
it is a seamless part of the story. And I love it when an author pulls that off, when magic is not just there for the sake of having magic, but it actually is an important part of the story, that the story, much of the plot hinges on the way the magic works and develops. And she does that in a way that I thought was really, really pretty brilliant. Some of the character arcs have a lot to do with the magic, and it is magic with a cost, no doubt about it. So I'd like to get everybody's thoughts on how the magic was woven into the plot and how it was presented, and go ahead with the spoilers. So everyone, this is your time to, if you haven't read Jade City, you might want to leave, because we are going to get into spoilers now. So who wants to talk about the magic first? And
I'll go first.
All right, cool.
Okay. So one thing I noticed is that Fonda had written a lot of sci-fi. I shouldn't say a lot, but she's written sci-fi before this. And like one of the things that sci-fi does, and one of the like best pieces of sci-fi, is like introducing new technology and science, and then how does that change society? How does that change humanity? And what she did when she implemented Jade into her story was, how does that affect the society? And you can see it ripple out through social interactions, through the hierarchy of the class system, all the way down into a black market e-commerce, or I say e-commerce, oh my God. Work on the brain. But it was this black market, and how people would try to hijack something like that. Let's make a synthetic version of this, yada, yada, yada. So I just think that she maybe came at it from that like sci-fi approach. And I did, I did my homework whenever I did my review, and she talked about how, sci-fi, she wanted to kind of lean into her sci-fi chops whenever she introduced magic into her fantasy story. And I think she did a really great job of that, and does not only just asking questions, but also answering them for us. Like, you could probably read the first few chapters, like, I wonder what's going to happen with that, what the impact of this is on global trade. And she's like, oh, I actually have an answer for you. So it's very well thought out and feels very seamless whenever you look at the culture as a whole.
Brilliant. Taylor or Bookborn, any thoughts on the magic and how it was integrated into the story, the impact on, you could talk about specific characters, because what I really enjoyed was how certain characters, like Lan, for example, that's a character that it was so painful to read his particular arc and how
My baby.
yeah, certain
Anne was my
characters.
favorite character because I am
Me too.
fantastic at
Same.
choosing characters who
Me
die.
too.
Every series. It's like
Well,
my favorite
I
character
figured
dead.
I figured within the first 50 pages that he was going to be a Ned Stark,
Oh, really?
I had a
yeah.
hunch.
I
I had
did
a hunch.
not.
Now I will say I didn't think it was going to happen in the
got
middle of the
me.
book. I didn't think it was. I kind of wish it would have been a little further because one of the. I'm taking over. Go ahead, keep talking.
Go
Go
for
for it, Jimmy. Do it.
No, like one of the things I really like is Land wearing more Jade, and it's like more responsibility, more pressures from the family. So it has like a really nice piece of imagery set along with it. His like, fighting basically an addiction at this point. And I thought that was fascinating. And I kind of feel like it didn't go long enough. Like, I think you could have got more out of that and maybe said a little bit more with it too. That's easy for me to say, because hindsight's 2020, but I was shocked when it happened. And then I kind of felt like I would have liked to see that be drawn out a little bit more, to be honest with you. But I mean,
disagree.
How dare you?
Only because it was so shocking. I could not
Yeah.
believe Lee was killing off Lan. I was like, he
Great
is
scene.
not dead. And
Great
then they
scene.
have
Yeah.
the funeral, and you're like, oh my gosh, he's dead. And like,
Yep.
this is my unpopular. Hilo took me a while to get behind. Hilo is like everything I am
Same.
not. Look at this, Taylor. Look at us. BFFs.
Yeah, I know,
and
right?
he's so like just a wild cannon. And so the stress I felt with Lan being dead and now Hilo is taking this mantle way too early, like I think that benefit outweighs, because I do understand like the Shine addiction part was super fascinating and I can see wanting more of that, but I think the punch of when it happens is more devastating to the family.
And the addiction is second to the weight of responsibility, and then him lying to and like there's more to it. I have a wonderful patron named Davis who wrote like an essay about it, and I was like, no, I agree. I just wanted more addiction stuff. Like, that's all. Like, so yeah, I mean, it definitely worked. The scene's tremendous, I think.
I feel like she was almost trolling us with the water. Because always when someone goes in water, you're like, you don't see a body. She was like, oh no, but he's dead. Like you didn't see a body yet. But I was actually reading that scene in public the first time I read this book. And I screamed out loud. I was like, no, when they revealed that he was actually dead, because he was my favorite as well. But I do think I agree with Bookborn in that it sweeps the rug out from under you and the characters, because he was the anchor. And now you're like, well, all of you are a mess. You're all a hot mess. And now you have no one that's your anchor. What are you going to do? And that feeling of stress, I think, is key to the way that you react to the rest of the story, right? Because I also, Hilo is, he's an incredibly written character.
Yes.
He's an incredibly written character, but he's not my fave. He's not my fave in the story. So having him take on that mantle, you don't really trust him at this point to do the right thing.
Yeah. Well,
I don't like Hilo.
Let's talk about Hilo. He's Jimmy's favorite character, I believe.
Nope. Don't like him.
No.
This is such an unpopular group of people. We
are, yes.
I know. I was kind of excited to have the hot takes, but I don't have hot takes.
Everyone I talked to was like, isn't Hilo your favorite? Hilo heart, Hilo. And I was
Hilo
like,
simp. Nope. Yeah, everyone's a Hilo simp.
So I think he's a great character, but I'm going to say this, and this is probably the most critical thing I'll say all night, and then I know people are going to get mad at me, but there is a piece of me that felt like Hilo was like a marketing decision in some ways. Like, he is the broken bad boy and has a soft side, and it's just like that sells so well that I'm just like, it felt very much that. And one of the reasons why I think that, one, I have a hard time cheering for Hilo. I do think he's a good character, but one of the reasons why, to me, like I felt off about him is that a lot of controversial POVs that you get in a multiple POV story usually have more distance from the controversial person at first. And a really good example of this is Jaime Lannister. Jaime Lannister is not a POV in A Song of Ice and Fire for a very long time. And you actually start to see things from his side. No, it's a different thing, but I'm just saying, I can think of other things. Animator Rake is also somebody that is very distant in Malazan as well. And I feel like we immediately get Hilo's thoughts, like right from the get-go. So it was really hard for me to to be like, no, you know, he might be a good guy. I'm like, no, he seems kind of like a jerk. Like he just seems like a douche. Like I don't know how to other way to describe it. Still, for me, it was harder to get behind him as far as rooting for him. I do think he's a good character, and then part of me did feel like, well, this is like your prototypical bad boy with a bit of a soft side for this one person who's awesome, by the way. When is that her name?
When
One of my faves.
she's
Awesome.
fantastic.
Great character.
Yeah.
Can't
She
say
only
more.
gets better.
Yeah, I have a feeling that character is going to blossom. So yeah, those are my feelings on Hilo. I felt a little bit like a marketing thing. I'm sure it wasn't. I'm just being a jerk. And then secondly, I just felt like because I was so close to his POV that it was very hard for me to be like giving him any benefit of the doubt, really. So
Yeah, you know, Jimmy, I didn't give Hilo any benefit of the doubt when I read Jade City either. So I don't think you're alone. I was really like, he's a bad person.
Yeah,
and
he's a thug.
He's a bad person. I will say, I think his complexity, he's probably one of the best written of the whole trail. I don't know, Taylor, would you agree with that?
Yes. I'm staying away from overarching spoilers, but yes, he's definitely one of the best written characters.
Interesting. Well, that's interesting, Jimmy, particularly because wasn't the broken bad boy with a soft side your wrestling persona?
Absolutely not, Philip. Absolutely not. I was the bully nerd.
Is there some projection going on here?
They're so great. You can
listen. There can only be one.
YouTube.
There can only be one. All right, and it's me. It's not soy boy Hilo. Okay, it's the Chad Jimmy. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to cut a wrestling promo on Hilo.
I do agree with the idea that there's complexity in these characters, and that Hilo is somebody in spite of the fact that I did not like him, and I doubt that if I met anyone like him in real life, I would like them. I found myself rooting for him in certain situations.
Phil, you like everybody.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when Lan is killed, that was one of the scenes where I was like, get him. Like, I kind of wanted Hilo, part of me really wanted to let him loose because I was so angry. Yeah. So he does fill that space, I think, for the reader as well, that kind of vengeful feeling that you have during the book. He gives you an outlet for that feeling, even if you know it's not smart, which Shay says to him. Let's not die today, actually. Let's just, let's chill out a little bit. But as a reader, he gives you an outlet for those feelings.
Interesting. Well, speaking of Shay, who I think I'm predicting right now is going to be the real hero of this trilogy. I don't know, because I haven't read the next two books, but I love her character a lot. Same. Why don't we move on to her? And who wants to start with Shay?
Well, we all just got off of a Hilo bashing session, so I'll start positive and say that I love Shay. I love Shay. I feel really, she's a character that I personally connect to. I think because of the intercultural aspect of her nature, because that's where I am. I'm constantly straddling two different cultures. Husband and I haven't divorced yet or, broken up, but who knows, like I can see... I can see her life is so close to mine, right? Having to navigate those spaces. Yeah. So even though it's not a carbon copy, I couldn't help but kind of attach myself to her. So I think there's a personal level of that as well.
That's kind of opposite though, right? Because in Jade City, she comes from the Asian-inspired culture, whereas her ex-husband was from what basically I feel like is a stand-in for Western culture. Am I wrong about that? I mean, it feels like the
no, it's definitely
the Espanians seem like Western kind of culture.
100%. And so it is opposite in that way, but I think the idea of making the choice to break away from what is seen as your home space. And then having people doubt that choice. And then in Shay's case, actually having those doubts come true, which thankfully, as I just said, has not happened to me, but having those doubts actually come to fruition hit me real hard because I have felt that doubt from people around me. So I really connect to her personally, but I also love the dichotomy of her character, how she can want two things at once and isn't quite sure what to do. You can really feel that struggle. So for me, it's kind of like that aspect of her character that makes me love her so much.
Yeah, she also has this tension between family and self-actualization. I feel like that's a big part of her arc, isn't it? Bookborn, what do you think of Shay? Is she a
Well,
pretty high up
what
on
you
your
just
list?
yes, what you just said is actually why she's high up on my list. Like
Huh.
Shay's inner struggle between escaping the clan and also feeling tied to the clan is just such an interesting theme. And like actually my heart broke for Shay at the end of this novel when she takes up the Jade again. It feels like a defeat. Almost it feels like she is going back to this violence that she tried to escape, but at the same time you like want her to be a part of this this family. And I don't know, that part was really hard on me, especially when you look at Andon and his journey. Andon, who's my other favorite character. Andon's like my favorite character, period, after Lan. I just love Andon. And so that I just was so brilliant. And Shay, it's funny, I love hearing why Taylor feels for Shay. Like for me, Shay represents a lot of the female in a male dominated space narrative as well, which Fonda Lee has said that she took that from part of her own life. When I interviewed her recently, she said Shay in some ways was the hardest to write because she took the most of Shay from herself.
Wow.
And seeing Shay's flaws was like looking at her own self, which I found very fascinating. And so I liked that element. She's so subtle with it. Like that's the thing. It's not this in your face struggle. You know, Shay is just like such a deep person, and watching how she views Ayat. Is that how you say Ayat? Ayat, I don't know how people say that.
I looked it up. I found Fonda saying Ayat.
Ayat, okay. Ayat, and how she views Ayat slightly differently because of that similarity they share of this female in a male dominated space was just like such an interesting element. I don't know. Shay is a very deep person, and yeah, I really like Shay a lot as a character.
Awesome. Jimmy, what do you think of Shay?
Yeah, Shay is my favorite living character coming out of book one. And the main reason why I really like Shay is everything that was mentioned is wonderful. But I think, at least for me, and I've talked to other people about this before, and maybe people could relate to this, but I feel like there's always like a moment in your life that you can remember. Maybe you were younger, maybe you were older. Shay seemed like she might have been a little bit older, where you disappointed like your father figure or mother figure for the first time. And you're like, I'm fallible. Like you're almost letting them know, like, I'm not perfect. And it is a really hard thing to accept in the moment. And I would imagine that most people feel that way. And I think Shay's falling out with Sen whenever she leaves, and she was supposed to be like kind of his favorite and the chosen one, and like she always does right, and then she doesn't do right, at least according to him. That is a very relatable moment. It made me very attached to the character immediately. And also something to be said that like I'm not going to go too personal, but like I can relate to the fact that like there's expectations on you, and as long as you're fulfilling those expectations, you're a loved one and that you're amazing and you could do no wrong. And then as soon as you take agency into your own hands for yourself, as obviously Shay did, and left the country with someone she thought she loved, she became not that. She became the outcast and a traitor. And it's just like, that's not love. That is not love at all. Those are just expectations. And that is a very hard lesson to learn in life. And I think Shay portrays that lesson and that hardship very, very well on page. So Shay for me is the best character, and it's not close for me. I think she's the best one.
Wow.
It's interesting that what you just said, because it's a major theme, right? With Shay, Hilo, and Lan. They all have these expectations, and what they do with those expectations and how that affects the family is like a huge, they all have the expectation. They all don't necessarily want it.
Yeah. And she walked away.
Yes.
And to me, that I just can personally relate to that in a lot of ways. So I just I latched on to her and never let go. And I was also very sad to see her pick back up the Jade. Like I was like, just go off screen, live your life, forget this.
Yeah.
You have airports. What are you doing?
Right.
Fly out of there.
Be a shorter trilogy if that were the case.
Yeah, certainly.
Yes.
Well, Bookborn brought up another great character, and that is Andon. And I enjoyed his perspective a lot because of his status as an outsider / insider, as a person who is visibly different and internally different in a way that I felt was in this culture, at least at its point in time, which is somewhat tolerant, I think, of homosexuality, but at the same time, it didn't feel like he could be very open about it. So I thought he was a fascinating character, and just his perspective, and also his particular family history and his fears about what being a Jade warrior is going to do to him. And he's got the family loyalty thing going on too, versus, ooh, this is what I could become. So there's a lot of tension. I feel like of all the arcs, the most tension I felt was in Andon's arc. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on him. So who wants to go first talking about Andy?
I will, because Andon's
Bookborn,
my
you
favorite.
love him, right? Yeah, I was gonna say, why don't you go first?
After Lan, Andon's my favorite, probably for the entire trilogy. And one thing you bring up, I do think Lee does a very good job of, is a lot of times when you see a character have a society that doesn't necessarily accept being gay, that's like their whole thing. Andon is such a deep character. That is a facet that he has to deal with, but he's also dealing with the same amount of pressure from expectation and this adoption into this family, and how he feels about Jade and his success, and Hilo, and what Jimmy brought up, this relationship that he thought maybe was more unconditional than it was, with we see Hilo's reaction to Andon at the end of the novel, which is also heartbreaking. So Andon is just such a deep well, and I kind of like to relate to those quieter characters, and really fascinating, like that found family, right? Because he technically isn't a call, really. I mean, he is, but I don't know, it's hard because I have to just speak for him in Jade City. So it's hard for me to speak about Andon without thinking about where it goes in the future. But I definitely felt a lot for his ending. It's interesting to see Shay and Andon particularly, right? Because it's like Shay takes up the mantle as Andon rejects it. And it's almost like you're seeing this again. Now Andon is doing what Shay did, and will it turn out differently for him? Or will the inevitability of the clan suck him back in? And I just found that fascinating.
Yeah. And he is a hybrid character as well. He's half Espanian, and he's constantly questioned because of that, or he feels judged constantly because of that visible difference. And I wondered, Taylor, what, especially in the context of an Asian based culture, what that means to be somebody who doesn't fit neatly into the recognized categories.
It's kind of a permanent state. So I know a lot of people want the calls to accept Andon, or not calls, the people outside of the calls to accept Andon in the way that the calls have. But from my perspective and my personal experience, I'm like, that's not going to happen. I never even had that hope, like within Jade City, the first book. And it's not necessarily always a negative thing, but it is a fact that, as someone who now is actually bringing a child into the world that is going to be half, you have to accept that is just a facet currently of Asian culture. And it made me connect to Andon in a very specific way. But I don't know, for me, I wanted him to, his ending scene, I'm trying to articulate this in a good way. His ending scene was wonderful, because talk about someone who walks away, right? He finally took an action. And so for me, he was one of those characters that I wish would take an action sooner, not necessarily to try to change the Call family or anything, but something for himself rather than let himself be dragged along. Because if you accept this other position that you're going to be in as an inevitability, and then see what advantages or disadvantages that gives you rather than lamenting that position, you can really do some interesting things with that space. And so for Andon, finally seeing him do something at the end, I really enjoyed that. the end of that. And it's one of the reasons I think why Hilo is so negative in my mind, because I'm like, how could you do this? He finally chose something for himself.
Well, for Hilo, it's not even personal. It's family first, you know, and how could you betray the family? It's not even, I don't think he feels like, he's not mad that he betrayed him. He's mad that he betrayed the family, I think, more.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
He's very similar to Daemon Targaryen in House of the Dragon in a lot of ways. I think in the idea
Hilo,
that
Hilo,
yeah. And I'm sorry, and I don't mean to hijack this, but I'm just thinking out loud. Like,
yeah,
Hilo is very conceited, right? And he's maybe clinically insane, but he also does care about the family. Like, he cares about the family in regards of keeping the power and keeping the prestige. That's something Daemon Targaryen also does. I will stop talking now.
I think Hilo cares about the family in love too. He just doesn't realize how he is not. Sometimes people love and they don't realize they're loving in the wrong way, and that they're not loving unconditionally. I do think he loves the family. I just don't think he makes.
I think he loves Andon too. He does love him very much.
In his own way. And I think Hilo's kind of like, why don't you all love me as much as I love you? You know, that's his perspective.
Oh, we see that in his perspective. He actually thought he was being like poor Shay. I can't remember what the exact quote is, but he's like, poor Shay. You know, I really had to help her out. And in Shay's POV, she's like, God, I am sick of Hilo thinking he runs my life. And it is such a good use of POVs. Like, it's one thing I talk about, like, a decent amount, is like a lot of multiple POV fantasy. Sometimes I'm like, this didn't need to be multiple POVs. Like, this again kind of feels like a decision because it's the thing to do. Whereas I would say that maybe I would have liked different uses of the POVs at times, but I think Fonda Lee's story does justify the multiple POVs, especially by the end with Andon and Hilo. It's really, really good.
Wonderful. Yeah. Did you want to say anything about Andon, Jimmy? Because I
didn't like Andon at all.
There we go. Andon. We disagree.
Yeah, I thought Andon was. I just thought. I think the representation, like everyone mentioned, was really cool. And I do like the idea of him being hybrid and kind of feeling like he owes something to this clan. And like, you know what I mean? It's like almost like, oh, I'm not doing enough. And then coming around to this decision of making his own move finally. But the problem for me is I just don't like the academy setting at all. I didn't like the academy setting. I didn't like anything around him in the academy setting. I didn't find all that interesting. I mean, the best thing for me that he did was get kidnapped. I thought that was kind of cool.
It's a good scene. That interview.
Yeah, it is. And it's well done. And I liked his conversation with Lon. I thought that was one of the strongest conversations actually in the book. So it's not that I think that there's no hope for Andon, but in book one, he was easily my least favorite, like by a pretty wide margin, I would say.
What about the scene where he helps
even more than Hilo?
Yeah,
because so here's the thing. I think this story would be infinitely less interesting without Hilo.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. And I enjoyed Hilo a lot. I guess what I'm saying is, like, I didn't really enjoy Andon that much. Like, it just wasn't that compelling to me. Yeah. I'm ready to be proven wrong by that. But Philip, you're going to ask, what about the end whenever he helps Hilo, right?
Yeah. What about that scene when he helps Hilo to defeat what's his name, the
mountain dude,
Gaunt Ash,
Gaunt Ash. Mountain, mountain horn.
Yeah, horn. I said fist. So it was
Your
a good scene.
It's all close.
I know. It's just I thought the scene was okay. This book never recovered after Lon's death for me, and I don't mean it recovers and I didn't like it, but it never hit that height again. Like, it was kind of like here, and then we went down, and then we came back up, but we never got back to that first hill on the roller coaster for myself. And that is like one of the things I said in my review, that I don't want to say it's a criticism. It's just my subjective experience with the book. So it was cool. It was fine, but.
Okay. Yeah. Well, who would you rather meet though in real life? It's easy for me, Andon, definitely. I don't want to meet Hilo.
I want to meet Shay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'd say Shay. Yeah,
of course. But
or call Sen and just have him tell me all war stories, dude. That dude is depressing.
I feel like he would be kind of like a little bit rough around the edges, though. You know.
Yeah. Your hair's too long.
He's infuriating for me. Call Sen. I just.
Doru
and Call Sen, throw him out. Just chuck him out.
Do not
send him down the staircase in his wheelchair.
Yeah. The whole thing.
There was a piece of me that didn't like love Coulson's dialogue at times. Like it was so over the top boomer that I was like, this is almost a character. Like we have like I wanted less of it. I wanted him to talk less, just like be the grumpy old man in the corner. But by the end, whenever he gives what's his name? What's the dude's name? Help me out. His friend. He gives him his Jade.
Doru?
Yes, thank you.
Doru?
Yeah, I love that angle. It's like, yeah, I'm old and feeble, but you think I'm dumb? Like I'm gonna give this guy my stuff and he's gone. Everyone's like, Grandpa. Like I love it. I like that.
But I feel like he does to some degree, and I don't want to stereotype or anything like that, but I do feel like he represents a patriarch, of course, but also that tough kind of style of parenting that you often see from different parts of the world.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Is that fair?
And I think, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I didn't mean to cut you off. Sorry, Philip. So I would say that for me, he's necessary. He's necessary to be there for you to dislike because he is a stand-in for that. And he's also a stand-in for the respect your elders culture, which is so ingrained in the society where even if it is like throw the whole person out level, because they're an elder, they get to stick around. And for me, Doru is who represents that. But I think they have to be there as a contrast to how things are changing, and also have to be there as a contrast for what is praised in war and what is praised in, well, quote unquote, peace.
Yeah.
Right. So there's two different standards. The goalposts shift. And if you can't shift with the goalposts as the time change, you're kind of stuck there. So I stand by the fact that, a nice push would be fine, but I do think that he needs to be there.
Yeah, because the book is generational, right? It is talking about how the different generations are dealing with Jade, with the changing atmosphere, the globalization. That's the word I was looking for. Even. And technology. And I mean, that's really, you're already seeing it in the first book and kind of representing the youngest. You got the middle and then you've got the old. And as the time jumps keep happening, you start seeing this generational gap grow even wider. And it's actually, even though I used to complain a lot, I hate series that have one word in all of the titles. I always complain about that, like, because it's confusing to me. I do think like Jade City, Jade War, Jade Legacy is a very good description of these generational things that you see. We start, city is small, war gets bigger, legacy is the end, is what we're getting towards. And I think that actually works very well when you start seeing these generational things that you guys brought up. Like, that's the point, right? It's to see how it's a physical representation of how the world is changing constantly.
Yeah, beautifully said. But we talked about the No Peak clan. How about the Mountain clan and the very formidable leader that they have? Fascinating character. We didn't really get her POV at all, but I just found myself kind of, whoa, okay, she's a step ahead of everybody in this chess game here, for sure, and maybe even playing a different level of chess altogether. So what did you think of her? I'm not sure I'm going to say her name. Yeah.
You told me and I said it wrong still.
That's okay. I in preparation yesterday, I looked it up. I was like, there's got to be a video of Fonda saying this. So
nice.
Yeah.
So what did you think of her? Anyone?
I love her. I love her so much. And I love her because I see her point. And honestly, that conversation between her and Shay that they had, that's one of my favorite scenes in the whole book. Because if I didn't love Shay and the No Peak so deeply from getting their perspective, I might have agreed with Ait in that position. I might have been like, I think you are seeing what the actual future is going to be here. So I love her because what she stands for can be hated from the perspective of the characters that we love. But objectively, she's not wrong in a lot of cases. She's brutal and vicious, but she's not wrong. And I adore her as a character.
Wonderful.
Personally.
What about you, Bookborn? Did you? What were
I
you
mean, I agree with everything Taylor said. I will say, for me, I grew more as the series went on. So I think in City, I didn't have quite the love I have for her in the end. Like, not love is the wrong word, but like I think she's an amazing character, for every reason that Taylor just said, because I do think that's where a lot of the tension comes of being like, well, I love No Peak. I want No Peak to win, but it's not wrong. She's not. She maybe has a better vision. Ait and Shay's relationship is probably my favorite relationship in the entire series. The tension between that. And additionally, I think Ait's very well done as a super smart character who can see steps ahead that's still realistic. A lot of times in fantasy, we get the over the top super villain mind. One thing I appreciate is Ait does make mistakes. No Peak does win sometimes against her, even if she is still thinking broader and longer. I think it's like rooted in a realistic way someone could potentially think. Does that make sense? Like, it doesn't feel as comical as some of the times I read like a super smart character. It feels much more rooted in reality. And I think partly it's because of her brutality, as Taylor mentioned. Like, she will do anything. And, you know.
Yeah. Jimmy, thoughts on the formidable leader of the mountain clan, Ait?
Yeah, I think what I like about the character and the execution of it in Jade City is the fact that like it could have easily just been the boogie woman in the shadows, and we never really get to hear from her. But Shay and her conversation is excellent.
It's brilliant.
It's really, really good. It's relatable. And then that's whenever you can start to see, like, who are the good people here? Are there any good people here? Do the ends justify the means? Blah, 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 blah. So that's what I would add is like, I just like the fact that Fonda Lee said, well, it'd probably be easier just to like let her sit in the shadows, but I'm actually going to bring her into the forefront, put her into a marquee conversation that's pretty pivotal in the book. And it was good. It's really good.
I also think having that scene set in the temple was a brilliant stroke because of all the cultural representation and the history and the myth surrounding them during that confrontation / discussion. Just that context was brilliantly done, I thought.
And Shay is having thoughts about her religion and about the history and everything. So it really plays well into that. Even larger outside of that, just outside of the temple and the religion and stuff, is one thing that is, and I said this in my review, is like superstition seems to play into everyone's lives, whether or not they're devoutly religious or not here. And I really, really like that, because I think even people who are like lackadaisically religious, at least here in America, still have superstitions that are tied to like how they were raised and in what church or whatever it might be. And that superstition is like it's not just one pious person, like holier than thou, self-righteous. Okay, that's the religious character. It's like there's different levels of it and different representation. So I really, really like that. And that's the thing that you can say about, I think, Jade City as a whole is, as a book one, I don't know if I can think of a better example of someone establishing culture. And I guess if you want to tie that into world building, like, it's really consistent. It's really, really consistent and realistic and layered. And it's very impressive.
Agreed. Yeah. So that Boro character, I think it's only fair to let Jimmy go first to talk about
great.
Boro. Why
Baro's
do you
necessary.
love Boro, Jimmy?
Well, he's going to topple this thing from the outside, and he's no good. He's an addict. He'll be dead by next week. And he's like, I'm going to rob Lon's grave, eat it. And I'm just like, it's a terrible thing to do. But I want to see what happens. I want to see if he succeeds. He's absolutely, he's a necessity in the story. The story would be way worse without him. So just having that outsider, he's not associated with the clans. He has been in the gutter and having to do terrible things, and he's just embracing it. And how is that any different than Hilo embracing his roles within the family and doing those terrible things? Boro is just embracing what he's been dealt in life, and he's going to be a climber, I have a feeling. And also the opening of this book is fantastic. I with him and the other boy, I don't remember his name, and going into the bathroom, stealing the jade, that whole thing just set up so many pieces of the story. And the fact that Boro, again, could have just been left to that. He could have been left as an opener, and then that's it. And to see him pop back up, I was like, yes. And then the end of the book, awesome. Loved it.
Speaking of that other boy, you do have an entire group of people on this island who are natives, I guess.
Aboriginal, right?
Yeah, and who have the ability to handle Jade without any effect on them whatsoever.
Yes.
But they are an underclass for the most part. They are regarded as lower than the rest of society. So I thought that was an interesting touch as well, because Jimmy, you were talking about the social classes and that aspect of it, and that's something that's, I think, it's present throughout. Like this, the woman in the Call household who takes care of Call Sen is one of those people, right? So
That's
the
right.
servant class, if you will. So I was interested in that. I'll be interested to see if there's more of that. But any thoughts from Bookborn or from Taylor on Boro? What did Jimmy convince you to be a Boro lover?
Well, I mean, I think actually Jimmy feels in some way similar to me. It's just like, I hate Boro because even though he's doing just as bad of things, I'm on No Peak's side, but Boro is the most interesting character to read from. He's the character when a Boro chapter comes up, you're like, oh, here we go.
God.
Like, oh my gosh,
here we
like, I'm
go,
so
right?
excited. There's a lot of characters I dislike and think are perfect for the story. I would not want Boro not in there. I completely agree.
Right.
And Lee implied that Boro was kind of supposed to be what you thought, like kind of like a character who was there for a little bit and then he just wouldn't go away, is what she said. Like he just wouldn't go away. And I do think it's a perspective that we lack a lot in magical societies. You know, I immediately kind of thought of Moash in the Stormlight Archive and how people
that makes sense.
Have been upset that Moash we haven't got to hear his side as much later in the series. Like I'm not going to spoil that, but like it kind of turns, you know. If people have read it, they would know what I mean. And so Boro, I do appreciate that he is the person who's going to take action against this class issue. And like that is a super necessary part of the series, in my opinion, like seeing that. So I do agree, Jimmy. I just think like I can't get behind him as a person.
I don't think he's doing it though as a revolutionary or to help anyone else. I think it's just, you know, it's about number one, right?
Yeah.
And that's why, and I think also because Lan is my favorite character, Boro immediately is just like, I have to hate him because he killed my baby Lan. Like, I'm gonna hate you forever. But because it's so selfish, like he pretends it's for something more, but it's not.
Well, he even thinks about the other boy, and I believe who is an original, like a native, and he's like, like treats him like garbage. Like he's like, oh, he's beneath me. Yes. And it's like, Boro, bro.
Great. It's great. It's so good.
Yeah, it's great.
Everything we've talked about is like, one thing I feel about this series is, yes, it's fantasy, but it feels so rooted in reality in a way that a lot of magic doesn't. And I think, Jimmy, it's because you said the sci-fi nature of it. Like the fantasy feels a little bit more like technology in some ways. And I think that's why it feels like I feel like I could give someone who doesn't normally read fantasy this series, and I think it would feel less like magic. Does that, I don't know if people agree with that, but it's rooted.
I think so.
I agree. I even, in my review of the book, I wasn't sure if I wanted to call it a magic system even when I was talking about Jade. I see it more of like a resource. But just quick thoughts on Boro is that a while back, Funnily asked for people's recommendations for like a casting if this were to become a show. And one of my friends put a cockroach for Boro. And I was like, yes, because he will not go away. Exactly what you said, Bookborn. He's just always there at the bottom in the trenches, and he never goes away. And I agree with everything you guys said, that he's necessary for sure. And I do think another aspect of his character is we get so close to the No Peak family and their fight with the mountain that feels like the main part of the world, but you forget they are the upper class, the upper echelons of this society. And we don't really have a POV besides Boro that is outside of that or doesn't have a connection to that. And I think Boro is necessary to show like the classism that these people you love uphold. This is what they produce. And so I do think he is a necessary point of view, but I will never, I mean, I hate him with all of my heart.
I'm rooting for him to bring down the whole system. I want him to bring it down the whole thing. Let's go.
Jimmy, you're sounding like
All right.
You're sounding like
I am. He's rubbed off on me. that Florida man has corrupted me. I have one thing. This is very small. So I said earlier that I felt like that some people could refute the mafia thing, and I'm going to give you one reason. And it's one thing about the story that I think I was hoping would have it, and they don't have it. All right, there's crime families and clans, right? There's really no police. There's in a mafia movie, it's always about the police. The police are the antagonist, right?
You don't need them. The Green Bone Warriors are the police.
That's what I'm saying. So like the state is tied in to it. So that aspect of it, like hearing so much about the mafia stuff, I'm like, I get it, mafia family, but like, is there going to be like an official form of government that then has law enforcement? And that's just such a big part of like Goodfellas or any of the other movies you see. Like it's constantly a stressor on the families being like, we got to do business, but we got to get around this, we got this cop in our pocket, but he might squeal or whatever it might be. So that was one thing that kind of surprised me, is that the families run the country essentially, right? Like the clans are the government in a lot of ways. And it goes down to the Lantern Man and all that stuff. So that's just a quick little note I wanted to add.
That's a whole facet of this. That's pretty cool. There are the Lantern Men and the economic aspects of all of this. Yeah. And there is a government and even like a royalty there, but they're pretty nominal in some ways. But they're
the JKA and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. The JKA stuff, I feel like is the stuff that I like remember the least. And like, I'm not totally sure if I understood all the scheming. I know Wen was like wanting to be a spy without Hilo knowing, and she like saw a deal, and that ties into Aitz, or however her name, her plan, all that stuff. So I feel like that stuff I'm like the most fuzzy on. So maybe that'll get better for me as I go on.
With Wen, we didn't talk about Wen and being a Stone Eye. I feel like being a Stone Eye is a very interesting part of the hierarchy and the class system we've been talking about.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, and she's
in theory.
Go ahead.
In theory, you'd think it would give her more power. Excuse me. You would think that people who have that ability would have more power in society. So I always find it so ironic that they don't, because they're not in this power. What's the word I'm looking for? They're outside of the Jade structure, and they're the only people that are really can be outside of the Jade structure. And I think it kind of hurts my heart when you see how they've been roped into being in the lower rungs of the sale and export of Jade, when they are almost overpowered, if you think about it, like the ability that they have.
But
so it's very interesting. Exactly.
It's that superstition.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That Jimmy was talking
Jimmy
about.
mentioned. Yep.
Yeah, I think Wen's awesome, by the way. I thought I was worried that Wen was just going. So when I first met Wen, I was like, oh, she's going to be like Hilo's soft spot, and she's going to die, and that's going to send Hilo into a mass rage. Maybe that still happens one day. Who knows? But I thought that was good. Yeah, I literally thought that was it. Like I thought, like, all right, Wen's getting fridged to this book. That's easy, GG. And that didn't happen. And Wen actually has a lot more to play, and she's really smart. And it's kind of nice to see Hilo like. I mean, he's kind of dumb around her, to be honest. Like he like she's like definitely got a lot more going on there than she's letting on to him, and she's kind of playing him a little bit. And I really like that.
Awesome. All right. Any final thoughts then? I think this has been a fantastic discussion, and I thank all three of you for adding to my appreciation for a book that I really enjoyed a lot, and I'm very excited to continue in this trilogy. And when we stop recording, we can figure out who wants to maybe host the next discussion on Jade War. And so, thank you all three. But do you have any final thoughts you want to leave us with?
I guess for me, not necessarily a final thought, but the three of us have been talking a lot. But I wanted to know, Philip, for you, what are your overarching thoughts on this book?
Okay. Well, I was being a good host, or trying to be a good host anyway. I enjoyed it a lot, and I had fairly high expectations going in. Like I said earlier, I enjoyed the cultural aspects of it a lot, and I thought that the character work was really excellent, that I felt invested in these characters. I enjoyed the different POVs. I agree with Jimmy that there was a bit of a height there, perhaps a little earlier than usual, with Lan's demise, and that things probably never got quite to that level again. So I think that's a good observation on his part. And that's not necessary. Not every book has to follow the same plot structure where you have, this exact moment, and then you have the denouement and all that. I mean, she
Mhm.
chose to do something a little bit different there, and I respect that. I almost thought, well, what if she had made this 2 books and ended the first book with Lan's death and then did the rest? And I thought, no, you know what? It's okay the way it is. It's good the way it is. But yeah, my overall thoughts, I'm impressed. And if it really does get better, if Jade Legacy is everything that people say, then I expect to be pretty blown away. So yeah.
It's definitely the thing I'm most excited to be reading right now. So like I'm gonna start Jade War literally as soon as this ends. I'm gonna go start it, and I'm really pumped.
Cool. It's interesting because I don't know if you've seen this, Taylor, is a lot of people don't like Jade War as much, and it makes them not want to continue. And it's interesting because for you, Philip and Jimmy, I actually don't think that's going to be a problem. I have a feeling you guys are going to understand what Lee is doing with Jade War. Do you feel like that's true, Taylor?
Yeah, I think the things that you guys have expressed that you liked in Jade City means that you'll like Jade War. Yeah, I think. Yeah, especially the prologue, Jimmy. You're gonna love it. I think. But
Arrow, let's go.
You're gonna love it. But yeah, I think some people find Jade War. Some people said it has middle book, but I don't think it does personally.
Me neither. I think the problem is Jade War shifts wider. The scope becomes much bigger. And so I think if people really enjoyed the small scope of City, that is a difficult adjustment. But from what you guys have said, it seems like you are eagerly awaiting the bigger.
Oh yeah, I'm here for bigger
stuff.
Well, you can tell she was setting it up in book 1. She constantly kept trickling in little things, and then the global trade. Like I feel like it was pretty obvious that was going to happen, at least for me.
And you guys like Malazan, so you like when it gets bigger and complicated and more things come in. So
bring me more scope. I need more scope.
We can do scope. Absolutely.
Yeah. There's a scene in Jade War that I will never forgive a specific character for. I talk about screaming out loud. So I'm curious when you guys read when we reconvene, if you can pinpoint what that was, because it lives rent free in my head, and I even after Jade Legacy. So
okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, all 3 of you. It's been a really lovely discussion. And as I said before, I feel like I have gained some new insights and appreciation for this book that I really enjoyed even in the first place. So this is fantastic. And thank you, everybody who has watched this discussion. And we will be, I hope, getting together again to discuss the next 2 books in this trilogy. So look out for announcements about that. Maybe I'll even put in the description, if we can decide after I record this, who might be hosting the next one. So everyone, thank you very much. And until next time.